So in this video, I'm going to go through the Ballydesmond Polka. It's the Ballydesmond number 2, and I'm going to show you where to do breaths in this polka, and also I'm going to show you some cuts on 3 notes. So the cuts will be on A, G and E. And all of the cuts are going to occur where you've got 2 of the same note side by side. So where you've got A and A, you do A and then a cut on the second A. G and G, you play G and a cut on the second G, etc. So it's just cuts in those places. So here we go. So I'm just going to start by showing you the 3 cuts so you know which fingers to use for the cuts. So we're going to start with an A cut. In an A cut, what you use for the actual cut note is the B finger. So you're keeping this finger down. So it looks a bit weird, but that's how you do it. This is what it sounds like. So the sequence in a cut is you play the cut and then the note. So that's what I'm going to do. Okay, so cut, note. So when we're playing 2 A's together, we play A, then we go to the cut note, and then we sort of slam that finger down, and then you've got your A cut. So that's your A cut. The next one in this tune is a G cut. So same thing again, you do the cut before the note. So the cut on a G is your G finger. So what you do is you, if we're going to play G and then a G with a cut on it, you play G, then cut, then put that finger down really fast, and that's your second G. So it's... And then the third cut that we're going to do in this tune is on a double E, so it's the same kind of context. So there's an E. A cut on an E, you normally use your G finger again. So you keep these fingers down, and for the E cut, you lift that finger. So it's cut before the E, of course. Only 2 things should be happening in a cut, the cut and then the note. And what we're going to do in the context of this tune is we're going to play an E, then a second E with a cut on it. So that means you play E, then cut, then put that finger down really fast, and there's your second E. Okay, so those are the 3 cuts. So if you just kind of play through those first, making sure you're using the correct finger each time, then you'll be ready to do the tune. Okay. Right, so here's just a diagram of the 3 cuts that we're going to use in this tune. So the A cut is the B finger is off, and then you put that finger down really fast, slur into the A note. The G cut, your G finger is off, and then you put that finger down and you get the G note. And the E cut, the G finger is off again, and you put that single finger down and go into the E note. And it's always that sequence, 2 things happening, the cut and then the note. Okay, so now I'm just going to play through Ballydesmond number 2. I'm going to do it at a reasonable speed so you can just hear the kind of lilt of it. And I'm going to be purposefully putting breaths in certain places. And I'm also going to be putting in the double cuts. So here we go. Okay, so it's worth pointing out that when you play a tune faster on the flute, you generally need fewer breathing spaces. They can be more spread out because you can cover more ground when you're going a bit faster. But when you do the tune slow, which is what we're going to kind of do now, you do need more breaths, so you need to kind of probably double the number. So we're going to start off from that premise. We're going to start the tune really, really slow, and we're going to put in all the available breaths that you might need if you were going to play it slowly. And it's worth playing it slowly in the beginning because it gets you used to taking those deliberate breaths in the right places. Okay, so and the other thing is that I always say is that it's always better on the flute to take more breaths than not enough. It's just that you must always take them in the right places. So this exercise is all about learning to put the breaths in the right places. And so that I can explain to you sort of where the right places are, we're going to look at the actual written music, and I'm going to sort of manually mark in where the breaths go and the reasons why, using, on the premise that we're going to play it quite slowly to start with. So we're going to put in the maximum number of breaths. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to play the tune slowly for you so you can hear where we're going. So there'll be more breaths than I just did when I played it fast. There we go. Okay, so we're going to look now at the music, and I'm going to show you where I would choose to put breaths and why, playing the tune slowly. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so now we're looking at the first part of the Ballydesmond number 2. I'm just going to play the first part, which, are the notes that you can see on the screen. So I'm going to play it twice through, quite slowly, and then I'm going to mark in the places where I breathe. Okay, so when you approach a piece of music and try to decide where to breathe, the first thing that you need to look at is, are there any natural breathing spaces in the tune? So the natural breathing spaces would be gaps. So we've got one of those here. There's a rest here on the on this bar, final bar, the 8th bar of the first part. And that's a classic place where you can take a breath. But obviously that one breath is not going to be enough to get us through the tune. So find the natural breaths. The second thing to look at is, are there any notes that are long enough that if you actually reduce them in length and replaced the bit that you've chopped off with a rest, so that you can do a breath there. Are there any of those? So in this tune, there are a number of places where we can do that. So generally anything longer than a quaver, you can kind of reduce in size to introduce a breath. So if we look at the first bar of the tune, we've got here the note A, and it's a dotted quaver. What we can do in this instance is we can reduce or remove the dot so that it just becomes a normal length quaver. And then in the gap that we've created, because now we've got a quaver and a gap, we can put in a breath. So we're going to do that actually. I'm just going to mark that note, that A, and I'm going to put in a breath mark there after it. So this little V, inverted V, means this is where you breathe. So what we're going to do, in effect, we've decided to remove the dot after the quaver. So that's your first place. So this is what that sounds like. I'm going to play it first of all without the breath mark there. So I'm going to fill in the gap. So there's no gap in there, but there is a long note. So now I'm going to make that longer note shorter and put in a breath. So you can hear a very distinct gap with a breath has now appeared, but the spacing of the other notes, or all the notes in relation to each other, has not changed. All we've done is made one note shorter. So if we move on to the next bar, let's look here. We need another breath in this bar. And at the end of the bar, we've got the same circumstance again. We've got a high G, and on the high G, there is a dot. So it's a dotted quaver again. So again, what we can do there is get rid of that kind of extra little amount of space that dot accords us, make a gap there instead and take a breath. So we're going to do that. So let's mark this note as a breath space. So there we are. We've put another little inverted V there to say this is where we breathe. Okay. Things have moved around a little bit, but never mind. So I'll just move that, go back a little bit to make that clearer. There we are. So what we've got now is this in this bar. So we've got C, D, E, G breath. Because we've made the G really, really short. And we've got the breath. So now we've got two bars with breaths in. Here we go. Before we go any further, I just want to point out that on this part of the tune here in the first bar, where we've got the two A's, this is one of the places where I'm doing a cut on the second A, as we discussed at the beginning. So this is the note that I'm going to do the cut on. If you just listen to that. So it's E, A cut, breath, B, C, D, E, G, breath. That's where we're up to now. The next bar, we can do the same thing. So, except we're going to do it slightly differently. Whenever this note here, the first note of the bar, is a crotchet, so it's a one beat note. It's longer than a dotted quaver by half a beat, half as much again. So that's actually a really good place to take a breath. Whenever as flute and whistle players we see one of these notes, they make us really happy because they're really easy to cut in half, turn into a quaver, and put a breath immediately after it. So I'm going to just turn that note into a quaver, and what you'll see has happened is a rest has now appeared here, and that rest is the place where we can now breathe. So that's another breath there. We'll put in a breath mark just to indicate it. Okay, So now we've got in this third bar G, breath, G, A. You can even, if you need another breath, and sometimes I would take one here, put an additional breath in this bar after this G. And again, this is a circumstance where we've got a dotted quaver. So we can reduce the length of that if needed. Let's put a little breath there. That could be kind of an optional one. Okay. But what I am doing is on here where we've got G, G, on this second G here, I'm putting in a cut. So we've got potentially two breaths, and also we've got G, G cut in this bar. So I'm going to play the tune up to here, up to the A there, starting here, just to show you what we've got up to. And this is with the breaths and the cuts. Okay, so we're on the last bar of this line, G, E, E, D. Now when I look at that, I don't see an immediate breathing space. So we're going to leave those notes for now as they are. So G, E, E, D. But what we are going to do is on the second E, we're going to do an E cut. So it's G, E, E cut, D. Sounds like this. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning of this line. I'm just going to play the whole first line with the breaths as indicated, and a cut on A, cut on G, and a cut on E. Okay, so now we'll move to the second line. We've got a sort of a repeat of the first bar, basically. E, A cut, B. And just as in the bar up here, in this bar, we are going to do a breath on this A note. So that means we're basically getting rid of the dot on the quaver. We'll put a little breath mark in there. Just adjust it so it's in a better place. There we are. So we've got a breath mark. E, A, breath, B. Bar 2 is a bar where it's just 4 straight quavers, so there's not an obvious place to breathe. The same with this bar here. Okay, so I'm just going to play the second line up to this B from this E. So I'm putting in one breath, I'm putting in a cut on this A note. Okay, this is what we've got. I'll do that again. I did put in a little extra cut there, but we'll just ignore that for now. I won't do it this time. Now, the thing is with the sequence of notes in this bar and this bar here, oops, there, that's quite, if you're playing the tune slowly and you're really working on the breathing, that's quite a lot of notes in sequence to play without a breath. So in fact, if you remember, we took our last breath here. So we've got a sequence that begins here. It encompasses all these notes, all of these, and this note, and then we've not got a breath until we get here. So that's, considering we've been taking breaths fairly frequently, that's a lot of notes. So your only option when there's not an obvious breathing space and every beat is filled up as in these bars with quavers, your only option there to make a breathing space is to electively remove a note. And that is okay to do as long as you're removing the right kind of note. And the right kind of note is a note that comes immediately after an accentuated beat in the bar. So in a polka, which is 2/4 time, there are 2 beats in each bar that are really important, that are the beat notes. So if you were to click your fingers along to it, dun 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 yeah, dun, 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 that's kind of where the beat is, right? So in these bars here, the beat notes are the first note and the third note. So, and the same in this bar, first note and the third note. So those notes must never be removed to take a breath. You must always keep those notes in. But it's always okay to remove a note that comes immediately after them. So C, D, E, F, G. What I would choose to do is I would probably remove that note there, the second note in that bar, because I think we've probably got enough breath to go from here to here, but then we'll probably really need one. So if we cut that note out and make a breathing space instead. So I'm going to put a breath mark there. And in fact, I'm going to remove that note and put in a rest instead. So we've removed the second note, and this is what it sounds like. So I'm going to go from here and do the run up and down. So basically in that bar I'm going. I am actually doing a G cut on that high G, which you can do as well if you like. And I call that a highest point cut. Often when you have an ascending passage of notes up to a high point and then it comes down again, you often do a cut on the highest note. So that's what we're doing there. So we're going from the C, you'll hear the distinct gap after the G. And that works really well because it doesn't disrupt the flow of the tune or the rhythm or anything like that. So we're now on the last bar here. We've already got a breath here where this rest is. So let's just mark that in. It won't let me mark it in on a rest. Let's mark it in on a note. There we are. So we've got a rest there with a breath. So that means what we've done is, if you look at the spacing of the breaths now, so we've got a breath in the first bar, a breath in the second bar, potentially 2 breaths in the third bar, none in the fourth bar, 1 in the fifth bar, none in the sixth bar, 1 in the seventh bar, 1 in the eighth bar. And that's a kind of a good spread of breaths if you were to play the tune slowly. If you were to play the tune faster, you might lose 1 or 2 of those breaths. But in general, as I already said, it's better to do more than not enough. So I'm going to play that whole first part now, putting in the cuts that we've indicated and putting in the breaths. So here we go. I'm going to play it twice. So I ended the tune there on these two A's. Okay, these are both crotchets, so they're both notes that could potentially be shortened for a breath. And in fact, I'm going to do that on the first note. Oops. I'm going to change the first A into a crotchet and put a breath after it. So that means let's put a little breath mark in there. So A, breath, A is what we're left with. And also, because it's two A's together, you would do a cut on the second A. Okay. And if you really need a breath to carry you on through to either repeating the first part or going into the second, in this case, going into the second part of the tune, you can always make that one there into a quaver as well. Let's move down a little bit. Now we've got a rest after it. So we've got another breath mark there. Okay, so we've now annotated the first part of the tune with breathing. Let's look at the second part. So the same principles apply with the second part of the tune. I'm going to play the second part first and then I'll show you what I'm doing. I just played it through once and it should hopefully be fairly easy to understand where breaths are happening because, as I said, it's very like what we've done in the first part. So in this first bar here of the second part, the A, that is a crotchet, that is fair game to be shortened, made into a quaver, which we've now done. And that means we can do a nice breath mark there. So short, choppy A, breath, A, B. Okay, this is an interesting thing with breathing, that when you're playing high notes, a lot of high notes in a row, all of these notes are in the second octave. In general, you need more breaths than you would than playing in the low octave. The first part was mostly in the low octave. We've still put in quite a few breaths. In the second part, we might need even more, simply to maintain the breath sort of pressure to kind of play all those high notes in a row. So we might even put another breath in this bar, and the obvious place is the dotted quaver here on the A. So what we'll do is we'll put a little breath mark there, and what we'll do basically in playing it, we'll get rid of the dot. So the first bar then is, so we've got A, breath, B. Okay, and then the next bar is a bunch of equal sized quavers. We can probably get through that without a breath because we know there's going to be a breath coming here on the next note, this high G. Again, it's a crotchet, so we're going to make that into a quaver, put a rest after it. We'll have a nice breath mark there. So we've got G, breath, G. We've got a dotted G here. So again, we'll get rid of the dot and we'll put in another breath mark. So we've put in quite a lot of breaths already. Just to go back to the principle of double notes and where we do a cut, we're going to go A, breath, A cut, breath, B, and then A, G, E, F, G, breath, G cut, breath, A. Okay, so those double notes, anywhere you get two of the same notes side by side, you do a cut. Okay, so we're going to move on now to this bar here, this one. So this again is a row of kind of quavers where there isn't really a space to breathe unless you electively make one by cutting out a note. And then we've got a kind of similar thing going on here. We've got E, A, B. So we have got a dot there, but there's quite a long stretch between this last breath and this one here. So I'm just going to play around with this a little bit and see how that sounds. So we might need a little break in there somewhere. So what I've done there is I've played, this is the last breath here, we've played A, G, E, E, D, E, and that's the beat note for this bar here. And then I felt like I needed a breath a little bit sooner than this opportunity here where there's a dot. So what I've done there is actually cut out that note entirely, the A. And again, it's a note immediately after an accentuated beat, which is fair game to be got rid of. So what we're going to do is just delete that note. We've now got a rest there. We'll remove the A as well. And now I'm just going to put in a breath mark there instead. So we've got and that feels much more comfortable. So I'm going to play the tune now from the second part of the tune from here, and I'm going to go up to here where the breath comes. So I've moved on to the next note, the A, after the breath. So again, also just in the last few notes that we've done, we've got here, we've got E, E. So on this second E, you would do a cut. Okay. So potentially, if you wish, if you need an extra breath, because remember that we've said all these notes are high notes and you're using more breath, although you've just taken a breath here, you might want a little top-up breath where this dot is, and so that is a potential place. So we're going to put a breath mark there in. You don't have to, when you're playing the tune, put in all of these breaths. You need to put in the ones where you need them, but these are the places to breathe, and there are not really other places to breathe. The point being that what you're learning to do is putting in the breaths that you need in good places. That's what this exercise is all about. So now let's move on to the next few notes. So we're moving into this next bar. This is all quavers. Then we've got another lot of quavers in this bar here. So again, we're a little bit short of breathing spaces. By the time we get to this bar, we're probably going to need one at least. So I'm going to have a little think about whether to cut out a note. I'm going to play the whole second part of the tune up to these two bars where all the quavers are, and I'm going to see what happens in terms of where I want to cut a note out. Okay, so I did end up cutting out a note, and it was in this bar here, and it was, as before, it was the second note of the bar, so it's the offbeat note that comes after the accentuated onbeat. If I remove that entirely, we're going to put in a rest there, and then we'll put in a nice little optional breath mark. Okay, and then we get kind of to the end of the tune, the end of this part. It ends in the same way as the first part. We've got two A's, both of which are crotchets. What we're going to do in that case is, to make our breathing spaces, we're going to turn both of those into crotchets. We're going to put breath marks in there. Okay, and that gives us a whole load of breaths in the second part of the tune. So let's just have a look at that. I'm going to play it through right to the end with all the breaths we've put in. I'm going to play cuts on the second of the double notes as well. I'm just going to do that one more time. I think the first time I played it then I didn't cut out this E as we had done to make a breath. So anyway, that hopefully has given you an idea of how to put the breaths in this tune. So as I said, you wouldn't necessarily do all of those breaths if you're playing it fast, but as an exercise it's a good thing to go through it slow, make a point of putting those breaths in. Then when you kind of get used to doing it, you can, and as you start to speed up, you can eliminate one or two. But in general, what most people need, playing at a kind of a reasonable, not too fast speed, would be a breath at least every other bar. Sometimes you can go 3 bars and then do a breath, but the breathing is really a feature of the music as much as anything else. If you do the breaths in the right places, they do have the effect of kind of making the beat more obvious. You never do them on the actual beat. You always do them kind of after the beat. And if you look, that's exactly what we've done right the way through. So if we look again at the first part, our first breath we've put where that dot is. The note immediately before the breath there is an accentuated beat. Sometimes the breath comes at the end, which is what we've done here. So it's not after an accentuated beat, but it's a gap at the end of a section, and that happens less often, but it does happen. But here, if we look at bar 3, there's the accentuated beat, there's the breath immediately after it. So that's kind of the pattern that we've followed as we've gone through. And as long as you take breaths in those places and not on the accentuated beats, don't sacrifice those beats, you'll be on the right track with playing this tune in a kind of an Irish rhythm. Okay. Right, so now we've gone through all of that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the tune through for you to play along to. So I'm going to do it slow first off, and I'm going to play it through twice. So feel free to play along. that had plenty of breaths in it, but I was, as I was going along, moving the breaths around. I wasn't necessarily always doing all the breaths or all of them in the same places, but they were all in the same kind of places. So what I'm going to do now is play the tune faster. There will be less breaths on my part, but you know, this is how it goes when you're doing this stuff. So.